Hi, and thank you for coming to my talk today. I'm really excited to be here as this is my first ever GRIMMCon and it's also my first ever conference. So I thought a fun way to start off this conference, since it's all virtual, is to ask you all, my virtual audience, a couple questions. The first question is, do you think you're a good speaker? Why do you think you're a good speaker? I would guess a lot of you fell into one of three categories. Yes, I think I'm a good speaker. No, I don't think I'm a good speaker. Or maybe I am a good speaker. I want to ask another question. Do you know you're a good speaker? I want you all to ponder that while we're talking through this concept. I know I wasn't a good speaker my first year at a Big Four consulting firm. I was stuttery. I could not stop shaking. And if someone had asked me what my name was before I walked into an executive's room, I probably would have said yeah and walked the other way and gone to the bathroom to collect myself. I was too focused on having the right answers instead of actually looking at the situation I was solving for. I failed a lot of speaking engagements, some well in front of executives, and I thought the best way of failing was to do that in front of people and do it constantly. But I hated that way of learning, and I think it's the worst to do by failing or learn by failing. So instead, I decided to do some research, and I practiced that research every chance I could, whether it was on projects with my managers or in front of rooms of executives. So what I learned today is those tools, and I wanted to share them with you. Before we do that, I think it's important for you all to know who I am. My name is Alexandria Esposito, and like most of you, I work in information security. I never thought I'd be working in this industry. I thought I was going to be a lawyer, but I landed here and I couldn't be happier. To tell you some of the three important professional facts about myself that I like to share with everyone is that I'm curious about how things break. I always have been, and problem solving is a way to continue that passion. Critical thinking and solving hard problems is essentially why I became a consultant. It allows me to do that almost on a daily basis. And then lastly, communicating security solutions and their impact to my clients and to our clients over at GRIM. I am here to talk about speaking with impact. Since the past 3 years, that's all I've had to do is speak to executives about their security impacts. But on a personal level, I think it's important that you know about me outside of work. And I have some pictures here. On the top left-hand corner, you see my dog Cooper. He is 5 years old and he has been my shadow throughout the COVID pandemic. And then on the bottom left-hand corner in that black and white picture is my dad. He's my best friend. He's been my biggest supporter throughout my entire life. And he's the first person to show me a computer and the first person to actually get me interested in cybersecurity. And then on the bottom right-hand corner is my boyfriend, Michael. He has been a large part of my life and he has taught me so much about myself and I couldn't be happier with him. And then also I love playing Apex Legends with my twin brother, John. Unfortunately, John and I don't have a lot of good pictures together, so that's why he's not featured on here. So why are we here? I think we need to put a framework together so we all know where we're going. Our first step is to define communication. It's very important for us to have a baseline. My definition of communication and your definition of communication might be different, so let's get on the same page about it. On top of that, communication has a couple things that we need to talk about in it. What makes a bad communicator? What are the pitfalls of communication, right? And what makes communication easier? And then we'll talk about my favorite part of this talk is the reason we're here is the SCQA framework. And in the SCQA framework, in our A area, we're going to talk about the time and difficulty factor. So how do we factor in time and difficulty to show our executives that we've thought through the problem? And then lastly, I will be repeating these questions throughout the entire talk, but we'll wrap up with, did I understand you and did you understand me? These are questions that you'll hear throughout, but it's important to keep in mind that they are the driving force of the SCQA framework, in my opinion. So before we can get to the core of our talk, we need to define our problem. What is communication? Communication has a lot of constitutes these days. It could be texting, it could be FaceTiming, it could be tweeting, Instagramming, Facebooking, Zoom calls or Zoom conferences, or, the casual in-person communication that we've kind of lost over the last year. But what does it really mean? Well, I can assume that your definition and my definition are the same, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to define it for us. So for the purpose of this talk, communication is the act of not talking itself, but the act of articulating your point and having it received on the other side. Simple, right? Because there's a whole fact of I need to get my point across in the first place, I need to ensure that the people in the room, when they're telling me about the problem, are telling me all the facts that I need, which is where our first question comes in of, did I understand you? Have I been provided enough information to be able to talk about the problem? And then on the other side of our screen, we have our audience members. They're asking the same thing when you get into that room after you've gone through the whole proposal and gone off and done testing for weeks. Now it's, did we understand what the solution being offered is? And so I'm asking myself as the speaker, did you understand me throughout that entire presentation? And it's important for me to be asking myself that question. On the other side of the script, we also have our audience asking themselves, did we even give a crap about what this person has to say? I know that I care about the offered solution that I'm presenting to these executives. And I know that these executives are very busy and likely don't have a lot of time to talk about my offered solution. So did you understand me comes in a lot, and it's going to be important as you're presenting to your audience. I want to talk a little more about these questions, and I know it's going to seem a little redundant, but it's important that we get these right. Communication seems simple, but it's not easy. As you can see on the right over there in our cartoon, I love cartoons. I think they're great at depicting things that we might not be able to say perfectly with words, but this person is saying a lot of buzzwords and his audience is saying, I have no idea what he's talking about. I just want to help. So how do we not be the person presenting on the right? So did I understand you? These are questions that I'm going to be needing to ask myself before, during, and after the presentation. So what is important to my audience? Is it the impact of a security finding? Was it something broke and we need to figure out why it broke? Was there a remediation effort that failed? What is it? So I'm asking myself these questions too. Why are you listening to me? And like I said to you in the beginning of this presentation, I feel that you all are listening to me today because I've been speaking to executives and working in consulting for 3 years, which has allowed me to understand this art of public speaking. So another things that you want to ask your audience or understand what your audience's role is. Do you have to solve the problem? Is your audience having to solve for this problem? Most likely, yes. That's the basic question, right? Do you have to implement the solution? Okay, I'm offering you a solution. Is now the audience's job to go off and take this offered implementation and do it themselves? Or are they paying me to implement this solution? All very important things to understand to help you understand your audience. And then lastly, you're in the executive's room talking about this offered solution and you want to know, did you understand me? Like most of you, or I hope like most of you, I've been in executive rooms and thought to myself in a moment of insecurity, please, please, please understand what I'm saying to you. I wish I had learned to ask, did I answer what was important to the audience with facts and data? Did I test my hypotheses? And further, learn how to silently ask the room by context clues if they're understanding me. Is the room paying attention? Are they on their phones? What's going on? And are they caring about what I'm proposing to them? If not, if they're not caring, how do I get them to? So we can all make communication hard. It's unfortunately the fact of life that communication can get mixed up sometimes. So I wanted to put some of the pitfalls that we've probably all seen here in a list of 3, because I like lists of 3. There's 3 things you can do to make communication hard for yourself. Get on your soapbox, give your audience your non-expert opinion, and rant as much as you possibly can. Let's just say that you've solved a very hard security problem. We're being very high level here just so that we can all stay on the same page. You are really excited to tell these executives about your offered solution, how you did it, all the details about how you did it. So you get up and rant as much as you possibly can, and you don't really look up at your audience while you're doing it. You're just sitting here talking about your security finding. While that's all good, sometimes you might lose them because, as you can see with another cartoon over here on the left, you can have this internal dialogue going on in front of your executive audience and they could lose you. Give your audience a non-extrovert opinion. I try to avoid the words I think and I feel as much as I possibly can. Sometimes you have to throw in the I think and I feel just to show that this is your opinion. But if you can avoid them, I suggest you do. And ranting as much as possible and getting on your soapbox can be similar, but you're trying to engage your audience. If you're a solo communicator, you're doing it wrong. And then lastly, before we get into how to do the work, there are some traits that we can all develop to be good communicators. You want to be a listener. The more that you practice listening, the better you are going to get at framing the SCQA framework. You're going to be able to find your situation and listen to what's important from what that person is telling you. The good news is you can learn this skill. You can stop talking and you can start listening to people around you to learn it. Next trait that you could possibly try to develop to be a good communicator is solution oriented. We don't want to always jump to past experience to be a good solution or to find the solution to your problems, but we want to always try to put the solution first, which is why the SCQA framework will help you do this. And then lastly, careful word choice. We all know as communicators, the words that we use are important. So how do we pick those words in a way that will articulate the impact of our findings? I like this cartoon over here on the right because this person, while very wrong tactic, was innovative in the way that he got his audience to pay attention. Try and do that. Try and be innovative with the way that your audience is going to be engaging with you. Don't turn on the sprinkler system, but definitely try and find a way that your audience is going to engage throughout your talk. How to do the work is now the most important part of our talk and the reason that we're here. And I'm very excited to talk about this SCQA framework. So now we finally have gotten to the topic that I've been wanting to discuss this entire talk, the SCQA framework. I might nerd out a little here, but this idea has changed my life and the way that I look at problems. Not only problems that I'm being paid for, but problems that are going on in my personal life. One thing to note that I learned about the SCQA process is that it takes a little time to start structuring your thinking this way. It's a very, very structured way to think about problems and situations. Now, you don't always have to follow this, but I think it's a good idea. So let's dive in. You always want to start with your situation. You need to ask your executive or that executive's delegate as much as you possibly can to validate the provided background information. You are a dog with a bone. You're getting paid to go and fix someone else's problems. So you want to make sure that bone is right. And to reiterate, that provided background is ensuring that you have the situation correctly grasped. So once you think you have a handle of what that executive is telling you, it's your job to take away and go and start solving the problem, right? So before we get into actually creating a hypothesis and testing our hypothesis, we always want to make sure that we understand the whole situation. Problems and solutions are bound to have limitations. There's dependencies before you want to get to where you want to go. It may be that the company doesn't have proper technology or they have too much technology configured incorrectly. So take that background at face value and then poke some holes in it. Provide a reason to yourself and your team for solving for this situation. What I like to do when I start projects, especially with people that I haven't worked with before, is to ask them this question. What are we solving for? What do you want to get out of this engagement? The reason that I do this is because it helps set an end goal for all of us and it helps everybody understand the situation correctly. So once you've figured out all the complications and you are ready to go with your next set from the SCQA framework, you are going to want to check yourself. I think question is one of the most important parts of the SCQA framework. I think this because you got to check yourself. Everybody has their own bias, and as information security professionals, we've solved a lot of different problems. So we tend to have the knee-jerk reaction to look at a situation and think, oh, I've solved this before. But what you want to ask yourself is, have you solved for this to be exactly the same way with the exact same parameters with the exact same company? Well, you may have very well have solved for a very similar situation, but it's not necessarily that you've solved this one. So you want to make sure that you're looking at it objectively and not going back to confirmation bias. So once you've questioned it, you think that you have a solution that you can go start to test. I call them a hypotheses, obviously, because we're in scientific mode. We're going to want to test these hypotheses. So you go, and now you're trying to figure out what your offered solution is going to be. Which leads us to our last section of the SCQA framework, which is answer. I keep repeating myself here. I think I've said it a couple times throughout the talk, but answer is not saying you're providing an answer and this is a definitive and the only way this problem can be solved. I like to say you're offering a solution, because through this careful methodology of the SCQA framework, you have been able to test what will work in that given moment with these given parameters. That does not mean that the situation or this offered solution is always going to be the same and will always work. But you've provided a concept for your executives to go and test themselves, even though you've done the testing for them, and see whether or not the solution will be good for their overall environment. The thing about offering a solution is you're accounting for the fact that things are always changing. So I like to spend a little bit of time on this answer portion of the SCQA framework because it's probably one of the most important. It's the one where you're going to sit in front of the executive and tell them what you have found after they've told you what their situation is. So at this point, you might be thinking to yourself that you've got my whole situation and my whole presentation figured out. Maybe you've drifted off, gotten a couple emails, and you know what my offered solution is. Well, even if you think you do, I want you to pay attention for a second, because you might need to rehear that this is really important stuff. One thing that we may fail to account for in the SCQA framework, where we assume our audience has the same background, is that we're assuming that our audience is on the same story as us. So when we're going in and framing our offered solution, we want to account for something called the time difficulty factor. As we all know, executives like the answers up front. So when you're factoring in time and difficulty, you are providing that to them. I think that with all of our solutions, we have the ability to factor in time and difficulty because it offers all of the aspects of the solution. You're telling them, these are your limitations for implementing this solution. Maybe it's a resource, maybe it's a certain tool, maybe the remediation effort depends upon another effort concluding. So while you're thinking about this offered solution, you need to account for the level of effort your audience has. We all know that in information security, there's not always a level of resources or money being thrown at the solutions that are being offered. So you need to make sure that you are providing the value up front to these executives by factoring in time and difficulty, because it shows that you've checked through all of the limitations of your offered hypothesis and you've tested your offered hypothesis into your offered solution. You're also doing a couple of things by doing this time and difficulty factor. You're checking yourself, which is very important. You're seeing that your solution is going to work because you've accounted for all of this situation. And also, and probably more importantly, you're checking your audience. While talking about your time and difficulty factor, they're going to be able to think in this moment, is this solution going to work for our company? I need to ask a follow-up question because I don't understand how the presenter, i.e. you, has gotten to this point. It allows your audience to think and engage with you. And by the time you're already at this point in your presentation where you're offering your solution, this is where it's very vital for them to be paying attention. So we've gone through all of our SCQA framework, and we are at our most important questions, as I had said earlier, that these questions are going to keep coming up throughout our talk. I think it's important to take a moment here and to find something that I find very useful. And it's actually was recently introduced to me through a book called Think Again. So over here on the left-hand side, well, my left-hand side, you see a chart that says conviction with knowledge. And in the middle, there's a humility sweet spot. So the concept of confident humility is, and as I quote from this book, is that many people picture confidence as a seesaw. Gain too much confidence and we'll tip over into arrogance, as you see in our arrogant zone, or lose too much confidence and we become meek. This is fear with humility. It's where our insecurities come out. that we will end up having a low opinion of ourselves. And nobody wants that when they're walking into an executive room or a conference room. So how do we keep that seesaw balance? And how do we apply this to the act of public speaking itself? The way I like to look at confident humility is you can be confident because you know the material and that you have the ability to find the solution. But you also know that there's certain things that you might not have at your disposal. Whether or not that's a tool or you need someone else's knowledge, you need to have faith that you have the ability to be self-aware, to look at yourself and to enlist other people if need be. That's where our questions of, did I understand you, come in. Enlisting other people is very important. It helps you solve the problem. We don't have the answers all the time, but we do have the resources if we try hard enough. So, as Adam Grant says in his book, having faith in our capability will, while we may not have the right solution or even be addressing the right problem, we have the tools to figure it out. It's very empowering to have this be something that you add to your toolkit, especially while you're trying to answer the question of, did I understand you? It does the checking of what we were talking about within the question, and it not only helps you find the right solution, it helps you feel confident while you're walking into that boardroom that you looked at this situation as much as you possibly could. Now, the last part of our talk is something called, Did You Understand Me? I said this again in the beginning of our talk, that this is probably one of the more important questions that you should be paying attention to. And if you take anything away from this, I hope it's the SCQA framework and these two questions. So you've gone through and figured out your answer, you've presented it to your executives, and now you need to take the temperature check of the room. That's tough to do while you're standing up there or virtually looking at your camera and trying to figure out, is my audience understanding me? Do they know what I'm talking about? Well, while you're in the presentation yourself, you can check yourself first. I think that's the first important thing that you should be doing. Was I arrogant? Was I confident enough in the answer that I was providing? Now, right now, I'm checking my temperature and I'm feeling pretty good that I've explained what communication is all the way through how you do the work of becoming a public speaker, or at least tolerable at public speaking, which is what I was kind of going for here. Some of my favorite ways to include temperature checks for our audience, and probably the most important people in the room, is ask questions. It keeps your confident humility intact, and it allows you to engage with the audience in a way that you likely wouldn't have been able to before. So if I were you right now, I would probably ask you, if I was in the same room with you, unfortunately I'm not, does this make sense? Does the SCQA framework make sense to you? If not, how can I help that make sense? Does confident humility make sense to you? If not, how can I make or explain that so that you understand? Was there certain points that were confusing? What was it? You can let them know. You can let me know in the middle on Discord if this made sense to you, and I hope it does. But if not, I would love to explain any clarifications, or if there were some complications that maybe I didn't account for this framework. Once you find out those answers, I normally like to wrap up my summary with some key takeaways. But first, I think one of the most rewarding things in a public speaking engagement is that you got to the end, you didn't stutter, you didn't pass out, and you made it. So you nailed it. Do you think you understood what was going on in this talk? I really hope so. But before we go, if anything, I want you all to take away these 6 key takeaways. 1, communication. Define it for yourself. If you don't like my method of communication or my definition of communication, I encourage you to set one for your own. Having this definition keeps you straight when you're using the SCQA framework. All the important parts of the framework are there. All you need to do is utilize it. You need to assess your situation and find any complications when the problem is being presented to you. Ask questions not only of yourself, but of your team around you. And, go back and ask these executives these questions if it helps you test your hypothesis. That is the end goal, having a testable hypothesis. Once you find your answer, I like to say, I'm offering you this solution based off this information and these facts. So once you've gotten there, you've offered your solution and you've accounted for your time and difficulty for this particular situation. You need to make sure that the level of effort is articulated to your executive group, or else you're probably going to lose them and they're going to say, why do I even care about this solution, right? Lastly, number 4, confident humility. Very important. I think that this is something that we can all start to enlist into our daily tools, right? I want to check myself. I'm very confident in the strengths that I have, but also I'm very aware that maybe I don't have a tool or a person with the knowledge that I need to solve this problem. So how do I get that tool and how do I enlist these people? Since I have confident humility, I know when to enlist other people, which is our number 5 takeaway. When you know your weaknesses, you're able to involve not only other people from your team, but your audience while you're in the room. It takes a very transparent approach to telling executives about very sensitive problems that they're trusting you to solve. And most importantly, do I understand? I think that these questions, if anything, are understanding your audience and understanding yourself, making sure that you're looking at a situation in a way that allows you to solve a problem that maybe was unsolvable before you came. My name is Alex Esposito, and thank you for coming to my talk.